Welcome aboard, everybody. This is the supplemental piece to part 2 scoring lines in our 5-part DFS NHL from beginning series. I want to thank you all for reading so far, following along. The response so far has been outstanding. So obviously this is information we're not finding out on the web, and this is new ground that we are forging. So I appreciate you guys putting your faith in me to come in and take a peek at NHL DFS and DFSArmy.com, which is the site from which I do all of my work. My coaching, contributions from articles to Slack channel advice and whatnot from guys. I'll show you, again, really quick for those of you that aren't members, some of the coaching. I do a lot of bankroll management, and you can see me working with a newer member here already. I tend to give pretty detailed answers. I try to, whatever goes in my head when you're a VIP inside DFS Army, whatever goes in my head comes out on paper to you. So that is my promise to you. Let's really quickly look again where you can find me out on Twitter at Chapadong. You can also find me in YouTube, and there are links in the article coming. So what I want to show you today as we dive in is what we're going to be looking at when it comes to scoring lines. What are scoring lines? If you haven't read the article yet, scoring lines very simply are the combinations of skaters in hockey. They run in units. Hockey is an up and down, fast-paced, end-to-end kind of game where really and truly guys are just going balls to the wall, as keeping up with other guys up and down the ice, and that gets tiring. Their shifts only last a minute and a half or so before these guys are wiped out, exhausted, and need a little bit of a breather. So they jump over the wall, another team jumps onto the wall, and off we go again, in a lot of cases without missing a beat. Yes, they change when the whistle blows and there are stoppages and penalties and all that kind of stuff, but really and truly, the fun part about the sport is this is one of the few sports, I can't think off the top of my head of another sport that doesn't need a stoppage in play to substitute players. I mean, even in soccer, I know the clock doesn't stop, but they need some kind of a stoppage to bring that player into the game. Basketball, obviously, football, between plays, the clock may be running and they shuttle on and off, so I guess that's the closest scenario. But hockey, it's a very, very key aspect of the game, and I guess the more I think about it, it is in football too. But it's a very, very key aspect of the game in hockey. They typically run 3 forwards, a couple of wingers and a centerman. Sometimes this will change. You'll get all 3 wingers or 2 centers on the same line, whatever. But generally speaking, we've got 2 wingers and then a guy in the center. That's the centerman. And we've got a scoring line 1, a scoring line 2, a scoring line 3, and these days a scoring line 4. We've got about 12 forwards on a team, and that provides our depth. Not all of these, these fourth liners don't really score a lot. Sometimes their job is just to get out there and cause a bunch of shit and just blow plays up and run into people and knock pucks loose and send a message and all of that kind of stuff. The nuances inside hockey. But as a general rule, your top line has your premier talent, your second line has your secondary talent, your third line has some talent, and these guys will shift around. This is the thing I can't mention really in the article. These guys will shift around. Say Stastny and Tarasenko don't really shift around a lot. They stay paired. And Shen and Steen stay paired together most of the time. Barbashev and Sobotka will flip-flop lines sometimes. Sometimes Berglund will jump up here and join them. Sometimes it happens in-game. Sometimes it starts a game that way and then goes away from it. Honestly, and if you're a St. Louis Blues fan, Tage Thompson has been up here on the top line some this last week or so. This changes. It ebbs and flows. And I'll get into a couple of resources where you can track that here in a second too, kind of the bonus section of the video. But just to bring you up to speed on the scoring lines, we also have defensive pairings. These pairs often run together, but they will overlap. This first top defensive pairing will oftentimes be on the ice with either of these scoring lines. It doesn't so much matter. They shift a little bit independently. They kind of try to keep them together. They don't really worry about it so much. You can consider the scoring lines of wingers to be separate from the defensive pairings in a lot of cases. But what you're looking for in fantasy hockey is the number 1 guys that also serve on the power play unit, because you've got offensive-minded defenseman and you've got defensive-minded defenseman. And sometimes your defensive-minded guy is going to hang back in the back of the play, maybe block some shots, but he doesn't really shoot the puck a lot. He doesn't really set up the stud goal scorer with a pass very often. That's the offensive-minded guy. He'll pinch in to get into the offensive zone and get right up into the play and provide that fourth man and that extra support to really keep that puck down in that other side of the ice and really put the pressure on the opposing defense. That's what his job is. The other guy's back there kind of just as the safety, making sure nobody goes the other way and they don't have anybody back on defense. So you need to know in the league who the offensive-minded guys are and who the defensive-minded guys are. That also works with the scoring lines as well. There are offensive-minded scorers, and this is something I didn't say in the article either, but there are offensive-minded scoring lines. This one up top is very much an offensive-minded scoring line. Stats needs a premier assist or passer of the puck, supposedly. We haven't seen that in St. Louis. Then he sets up Vladimir Tarasenko, who puts the biscuit in the basket. And you've got guys that, generally speaking, are going to be causing headaches for the opposing defense night to night. And they have to plan for these guys. They have to stop these guys. They don't worry so much about this third line down here too terribly much. So when they come to let's say when they come to town, I'm going to put my top line. And there's offensive and defensive minded hockey teams too. And I know St. Louis is probably a little bit more defensive, but let's say there's an offensive minded hockey team coming in tonight, and we're going to do one of two things to them. We're going to, and this is where knowing the league is important, we're going to either match up against their top line with our best defensive unit, which might be this one, or we're going to try and match up against our best offensive unit because they are so offensive-minded, they don't give a crap about defense either, and we feel like we can just go barnstorming back and forth up the ice and get into a shootout with them. So we need to know how these styles of these teams match up, and you can find that in our key stats part 3 coming with kind of goals for, goals against, and team stats, things like that. But the other thing to mention is that the home team has the shift advantage. When the lines change, they get to put their line out last. When teams change on the fly, the visiting team makes their change, then the home team can react to that. So if the visiting team gets a little tired, takes that third line off the ice, and wham, drops out their first line, their big offensive line, guess who's coming out from the home team? The defensive line. Or if we're trying to match up against them in a shootout, we'll put our top line right out there with them. Because we want to make sure that we pick their weaknesses and we target it. And the home team has the advantage in that aspect. And that's another important thing to know. That doesn't always mean that in hockey, the away team, you need to be targeting the second line, and the home team, you need to be targeting the first line. It doesn't mean that, but you need to, as you dig into hockey and you learn more of the nuances of the game, you'll start picking these things up, and you'll start knowing that when X team matches up against Y team, and X team is the home team, they're going to probably run their second line out there more against that top line. So really and truly, they'll take this first line and they'll drop them down against the second line of the visiting team, and that will give them their best chance to score. So those little nuances help, and those are things I can't type in the article. You can see they're a little bit more detailed, and that wasn't what the article was for. So again, thanks for tuning in and listening to this portion of the article. The other thing we're going to talk about really quickly, power plays. When a team obviously takes a penalty, their guy goes into the penalty box, out comes the power play unit for the other team. They get 5 skaters, the other team's left with 4, and they're going to be very offensive minded. And as I pointed out in the article, a lot of times you're going to see one defenseman, generally an offensive minded defenseman, and then 4 forwards come out for a little bit extra scoring punch. You need to pay attention to who, and I'll show you over here in one of the resources how to pick that out really quickly, but you need to pay attention to who is on the first power play unit, because they're going to get the first crack at the power plays, and who's on the second unit, because these are the forwards you need to be targeting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 forwards from the St. Louis Blues play on the power plays. That's not obviously the first 2 lines, because there's only 6 of them. There's 2 of these others from down here that plug into the power play, and that can give you an advantage in rostering these cheaper third line guys, knowing they're also going to serve some time, some bonus time on the power play, and might get you that extra point tonight or those extra points that put you in the cash. And being cheap, free up your money to jump up here and spend on some studs, or in this case, even correlate with them. If you end up with a Tage Thompson that's down there on that third line and priced accordingly, yet paired up with a Vladimir Tarasenko who tends to run the sniping job on the power play, then now you can run this little correlation play here. You get 2 lines of scoring. This is a cash move, but you get 2 lines of scoring because you get access to this line if they score the goal. You get access to this one if they score the goal when they're at even strength. No penalties or anything. You can see a lot of stuff going on inside the Army. But they also correlate together on that power play, which means Tage can pass the puck over to Vladimir, who can put it in the net. Boom. Goal. And you get double points. Damn, guys, chill. So, as we're breaking through these lines, let's switch over quickly to some resources and show you. This is dailyfaceoff.com. This is one pretty good one. Shows you a lot of the different teams. If I want to switch teams up and look at the Nashville Predators, it'll shift over and it will go ahead and it will show me, who in a nice pretty format with their jerseys and whatnot once it loads the graphics. And I can see who their lines, their top line, second line, third line guys are. And then I can see who their defensive pairings are. And then I can scroll down and I can see who their power play units are. Okay? So that's Daily Faceoff. That's an easy resource to look at. It's not one of my favorites, though, and neither is CBSSports.com. This is another one. Their hockey page, I showed Boston really quick. It will show you who the position, the center. There's line 1, line 2, and line 3, and a little bit of line 4. So you have to kind of look at it a little bit tough. It's not as easy on the eyes. There's your wingers. There's your other wingers. So Krejci, DeBrusk, and Spooner make up the second scoring line. What it doesn't tell you is who's on what power play. So I'm not a big fan there. It does tell you who the defensemen are, the defensive pairings. Krug and Carlo will apparently pair up well with Spooner, DeBrusk, Krejci if that's what you're wanting to do. Okay? It doesn't tell you very well between the third and fourth line. I don't know if Akari or Backus is on the third line. I mean, I know Backus is there, but I wouldn't know by looking at this page. And I also don't know if any of these guys play up on the power play like I saw at Daily Faceoff. But it's another resource for you. So, another resource that I found was rosterresource.com. This one was interesting because if I come here to Tampa Bay, go to their depth chart, I don't know why it was giving me a redirect notice, but anyway, now I can look down here and see who their lines are a little bit better organized. This is the top line for Tampa Bay, Kucherov, Stamkos, and Nemeskov, or whatever. We tend to call it the Coochie Stank line, just as a fun thing to do. Palat, Point, Johnson are the second line. There's your third line. There's your fourth line. There's your defensive pairings. Once again, I'm not finding who's on what power play unit. So that makes this not a very good resource for me, but I'm just showing you the different ways to do it and the different ways to read the sites as we go. Let's look at one of my favorites. This is leftwinglock.com. Okay? They show me a ton of stuff from skaters to line production and line combos. So let's really quick look at the line combinations. Let's see, Anaheim Ducks. I can go back a couple of events too if I want to. I can see who's on even strength based on their last warm-up session, their morning skate, or I can see on their last game. So if I go back to their last game and click even strength, this is different because this is going to show me all of the combinations. It's going to show me what percentage of the time this line is together. This top, it doesn't tell me necessarily who's considered the number one line. I have to know that on my own, but it will tell me who's running together most of the time. One of the top lines, Reichel, Getzlaf, and Perry. 16% of the time, those guys are together. 16% of the time, that line's out on the ice. Silverberg, Cagliano, and Kessler are the second line. However, you will notice that Perry also runs with Henrique and Ritchie. Reichel runs with Getzlaf and Vermette. So you can see that Getzlaf and Reichel run together quite a bit. Vermette and Perry sort of alternate on that line. That's where you can start getting a little idea. If Vermette is down on a third line or something like that, you're going to get an idea of when he's going to run out there with the number ones, and that can give you a nice value play for a given night. Another thing I did not mention in the article, injuries. A lot of times one of these injuries will happen. Let's say Reichel gets injured, then Vermette might be the first one to come up and take his place, if that makes sense. And that's going to give you a cheap price. And I'll show you where a lot of this stuff pans out in our last resource. But let's get down to the defensive pairings. Again, you can see that they largely keep three pairs together. They alternate a little bit. And this includes power plays and penalty kill units and all this sort of stuff, which is a little too deep for what we're trying to do today. But their top pair is pretty evenly split between Manson, Lindholm, and Biska and Fowler. So now you know that about the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. Or the Ducks. I guess they're not the Mighty Ducks anymore. I just dated myself. If I go to even strength and go shift off to the power play, Then I'll see who the power play units are. I guess I have to submit it. But I can do the most recent game, I can do the most recent 3 games, the most recent 10 games, and all season long, or versus certain opponents. Let's say I want the most recent 10 games of the power play. Click submit. It'll load up the percentage of the time. This was power play unit 1. Most time on the ice, obviously, a 2-to-1 ratio or more. More of a 3-to-1 ratio. Silverberg, Henry, Getzlaff, Reichel, and Fowler. So Fowler's the defensive player, probably on with 4 forwards. And this is how you learn the league and how you learn when opportunities come up. Left Wing Lock, very, very good resource for you to go to. It's free, leftwinglock.com. If you want to see line production, it's another neat little thing in here with the skaters. Line production shows you a couple of ideas here. If I want to go, who's the hot skaters? I want the forward combos, and I want to see across the entire NHL. Who are the hot running forward lines? And let's say the top 10 teams, based on goals for and goals against. Now, Riley Smith, Carlson, and Marcia Shaw out in Vegas. So I'm going to want to look for Vegas to have a soft matchup so I can run a hot line out there against them. Colorado is also scoring well. Boston, both lines, they both had big games last week. So what you're looking at is a lot of goals being scored between these 2 lines, and you're looking at them being 2 of the hottest lines right now going in all of hockey. You're going to want to get on that bandwagon. Now, another thing that I can do is I can shift down. Well, actually, let's just leave it at 10 entries. These are the hottest teams in terms of goals scored. Let's look at who's the worst, who's given up the most goals. Nashville, the Fiala line. So let's say this is line 2 or line 3 in Nashville. I want to see where that matchup's coming in their opponent tonight. Who is going to be skating with this shitstorm of a line right now because they're playing very bad. Same with the New York Islanders, Ladd, Eberle, and Barzal. That's their second line. The New York Islanders' second line is not good defensively. So if I can predict a situation where a top scoring line like that Colorado line or that Boston line is going up against the New York Islanders, and I'm going to want to pick which one's going up against that second Islanders line. And really and truly, the third line isn't much better. Third line gave up a ton too. So maybe it's a secondary line in Boston when they match up against them. Maybe it's their top line. Are they at home? Do they get the last shift? Because if they get the last line change or the last shift, they're going to get the chance to match up very, very well against whatever New York Islanders line they want to match up against. Is this making sense? This is the kind of stuff that we start looking at when we look into hockey. And again, this is a little sophisticated for what we're trying to do in the article, which is why I bust out this video for you and show you how this works. Works with defensive pairings, 10 games, all season long, whatever you want to see. You can play with this and figure it out and start gleaning information that will make you a little bit sharper than your competition who doesn't even know this site exists, leftwinglock.com. My favorite resource, honestly, is RotoGrinders. They're free as well. Their starting lineups page, excuse me, there's only one game on the slate tonight. There's a bunch of games tomorrow, but this is Monday, January 8th. And there's only one game on the slate. What they show you is they show you the salaries, and we're working on something very similar to this inside the DFS Army for our VIPs, where we're going to show the lines, we're going to show some basic stats, and we're going to show the salaries so that you've got it all at a glance. And what I'm pushing for, and I know we're going to do this, is we're going to denote the first scoring line and who's on the power play. This is very, very important, because if I wanted to run the Maple Leafs line 1 tonight and stack it completely up with Austin Matthews and William Nylander, then I'm going to correlate the power play unit and that top scoring line very, very well. But Hyman does not run on the power play unit, so aw. But now here's where we're going to get into cash versus GPP discussion as we wrap up this video, because we've got power play 1 skaters on that second line too. If I want to, I can run Matthews with Nylander and Marleau. And now I've got a wing off that second line. If the second line scores 2 goals tonight, then I might have access to it. If the second line does the scoring, I've probably got an assist or maybe a goal out of Marleau. And if the first line does some of the scoring, then I've got Matthews and Nylander correlated, stacked, sort of mini-stacked, so that I can capitalize on getting the assist and the goal. And God forbid we end up on the same power play unit where Marleau passes to Nylander, who passes to Matthews, who puts it in. And now I've got my 31 points on Fanduel. This is very, very important to know when you're building your lineups and building your roster construction. Because if you look here, you're all or none right here. No other power play 1 in these forwards. It is all 3 of these guys On their top scoring line, their power play 1. If line 2 or line 3 does the damage and puts up 3 goals tonight and they win 3-2, you're screwed. Your game is over. And that's why we don't do that in cash. We don't get so tightly focused on these guys very often in cash, because in those 50-50s, we don't need to take the risk to win the prize. It doesn't matter if I finish at 100-man 50-50. It doesn't matter if I finish 48th or 2nd. I'm getting the same double my money back. So why do I need to put out extra risk? Why don't I play safer? Why don't I get in the middle somewhere there and kind of take some of the risk out? This is a risky move to run all 3 of these guys in the same line, let alone pick up a 4th guy and make it the defensive guy down low here, that's also on the power play 1, either Werenski or Jones. So if I'm doing that, I'm trying to make sure that I avoid that. So I don't have a lot of opportunity here. I can take the 2s and take Foligno, Milano, and maybe Jenner and differentiate a little bit that way and take 3 skaters, or I could take Foligno and Jenner for cheap, get access to 2 lines of scoring, but I'm not really correlated unless I get lucky and they're on the power play together. So while it spreads out my risk, or it spreads out my opportunity for cash type scoring, it wrecks my upside for GPP scoring, where I actually do want the tighter stuff. So in cash, we tend to spread out. I would use, Matthews, Nylander, Marleau in cash. I mean, you can use them in tournaments too, but I would use them in cash. In a tournament, I might take Hyman with Matthews and Nylander and hope this one in a 5-on-5 even strength situation goes bing, 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 and we get the goal. Or I would run, Gardner as the power play quarterback, on the power play unit, the first power play unit, and running with Nylander and Matthews both. So I get both these 2 on the top line. I leave Marleau out and I pick him up. Or if I wanted to run all 4, Gardner, Marleau, Nylander, Matthews. Boom. Okay, so this is, again, the stuff you think about and you play with when you're trying to stack these lineups together. You're looking over here. You might even run, this would be different in a tournament scenario where you run both defensemen, Jones and Werenski, because they're both on the power play 1. They're both on the ice all the time together. Pick up somebody like Panarin, and it's going to be a very, very low-owned stack for a tournament that could go off. Panarin, Anderson, Jones, Werenski. Nobody's going to pair their 2 defensemen up. People don't do that very often. That's a very low-owned technique. We'll talk about that more in part 4 or whatever when we get to stacking. Okay, so you have a basic idea now of the scoring and the way the resources are lined up and how to read these lines and how to kind of look for power play coverage, or to separate or to combine together if you want to, depending on if you're playing cash or playing GPPs. You got a little understanding of how the defensive pairings work with these guys, how the line changes work, how the last shift, that home field or home ice advantage works, and how that can benefit you and when it might be time to target a second line over the top line. And again, that's a smart cash move if you can predict that matchup, even though it will end up being a little bit lower owned because everybody loves to run the top lines when they can afford to do so. So when you're looking for value, you want to make sure that with the cheaper guy, you got some power play coverage. You're on one of the top 2, maybe the 3rd line, and don't be afraid to take that centerman or that winger off that 3rd line and take, Bozak and Marner for, 9.6K versus Matthews and Nylander for 13.7K. There's a big difference in salary there. Maybe you're going to target different studs on a different team because from studying up, these guys are in a great spot. They're either running hot or they're going to run up against a poor defensive unit or whatever, and now you've got the advantage to know that that's where they're going to come out on a positive end most nights. Anyway, that's a quick 20-25 minute primer as far as the compilation or supplementary piece to the video. Or the article. Glad you watched it. Thank you. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me into the DFS Army. Use coupon code CHOP, C-H-O-P, for that 10% discount grandfathered in over the lifetime of your membership. Let's go into more detail. Let's talk more hockey. Let's get into more depth. And let's build you into a better DFS player. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you soon.